This is Proxy Countdown. I am your host today, Matt Moscardi. On today's countdown, a conversation with Sarah Haan, corporate law professor from Washington and Lee School of Law. In the conversation, we cover President Musk, who's president of something, irrationality of rational apathy, how proxy fraud in 1888 looks a lot like fraud in 2025, and how the totalitarian state of corporate democracy found a Rand McNally map to political democracy. Sarah Haan writes at the intersection of corporate law and democracy on subjects like corporate governance, shareholder voting rights, disclosure. I'm sure you've seen her work in the Stanford Law Review, Yale Law Journal, Northwestern University's Law Review, the New York Times, and obviously probably CLS Blue Sky blog. Sarah is actually working on a book on how the corporate democracy increasingly influences the political democracy as you see founders and CEOs take more roles in politics. But enough from me. Let's get right into it with Sarah. Here's Sarah Haan. All right, can I start with a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you live at the intersection of the corporate democracy and the regular democracy, where is President Musk?
Well, Elon Musk is at the top of the heap in corporate democracy, right? So one way to think about him is just as this sort of wild success story at entrenching himself at the top of several corporate organizations, public companies and big, important private companies. And so what is super interesting about Elon Musk is how he is now essentially trying to take that dominance in corporate democracy, and he's right. Now moving into political democracy, and he's doing it in this, I think, really, unprecedented kind of way, because unlike Trump or, some of these other guys who get officially appointed or elected, he's doing something through back channels, which has a very corporate feel to it, honestly. So he's the corporatiest of them all.
What Musk is doing is not new. It's just at a level in the political democracy we've never seen. Was that right?
Well, so my take on corporate law generally is that it's all about power, and that you really have to pay very close attention to how power is being exercised. What Elon Musk is doing now in our politics is a giant power move, but he is sort of circumventing some of the normal. I mean, he's not just trying to get elected, whereas, he has to get elected to the board. He has to get his brother elected to the board of his companies. And then once he's elected to the board, then he can be named the CEO. And then there are other votes that they have to get the shareholders to go along with, like if they want to reincorporate somewhere else or what have you. And so that all really involves formal electoral mechanisms. Whereas in our politics, what is fascinating to watch is that he's just going through a back channel, and he seems to be exercising tremendous power in our government. And it speaks to how power maybe supersedes technical rules, right? I mean, especially, as I guess we move into a democratic breakdown, we'll just see that more and more. You won't have to get elected or even appointed, go through any kind of process. If the king says you get to decide who is fired and who keeps their job, you have that power. So it's really unsettling, I think. I think people are responding to how unsettling it is.
What makes sort of Musk's role in political, like the political theater right now, unsettling is that he is unelected, right? Like we didn't go through that mechanism. It was back channel. But even in the elected democracy of the corporate democracy, where he is hypothetically elected, not only does it seem like they sort of jury rig all these things? Like, I don't know what investor would think his brother would not be compromised or merits a board position at Tesla, but they don't seem to care at all. Like there's no vote, and I can't gel. Like the same voters are in both places in some ways, but in one sphere they don't care, and that's sort of Musk's behavioral sphere, right? Like where he is a source of capital appreciation, or views himself that way, and you should not care about what anything technical, any process. You shouldn't care as long as rocket goes up, right? I can't gel that with like we feel unsettled by it, but why do investors not feel unsettled about it in their own democracy?
Well, I mean, I think that this is a problem that we haven't solved yet in the corporate domain, where we sort of believe that the electoral mechanism works and is functional. And so we have basically, the form of democracy, but not really the substance of it. And so I think what you're describing is, corporate law has spent 200 years trying to make it so incredibly hard and challenging and dispiriting and burdensome for shareholders to vote that they don't do it, or they vote, through an intermediary. They vote by proxy. They delegate their vote away. They just do whatever management tells them. And then we call that democracy. But, nobody should be confused. I mean, that is, again, sort of the form but without the substance of democracy. And we've become habituated to that in the corporate space. But, outside of the people who participate in that, when you move into politics, people are really passionate about politics. The most important thing about politics is participation and people being active. And so now I think, he's in moving from corporate to political democracy, he is certainly facing down a lot of people who think he doesn't belong there, and who think that he needs to be elected or have some sort of mandate, any kind of mandate, real, genuine, not a fake corporate mandate, but a real, genuine one.
You have fiduciary duty, right? As a legal construct, and like a substantive legal construct that every investor will talk about ad nauseum. And it does not seem like 96% as the average for vote for a director at any company is the exercise of fiduciary duty. Why is the zealotry not ported back? Why do we not see it from investors in proxy voting?
Well, I mean, the whole history of the corporate economy has discouraged that kind of investment by asset managers. And I mean, in fairness, I think it would be pretty challenging if you have a really diversified portfolio. You have many, many companies. It's challenging to participate. And I think people just sort of leaned back. There was honestly, in the corporate law area, there was this sort of whole effort made to justify shareholder passivity and to cultivate it and to explain why it's especially rational and especially virtuous. And I think people just kind of bought into that. And so we conformed our ideas about fiduciary duty to this sort of understanding that, whatever management wants to do, they pretty much should be allowed to do it. So just always rubber stamp, hand over the vote, delegate your vote to management. And that's a system that we have inherited. It's only been in the last couple of years, maybe decade or two, that we've really started to see pushback by some asset managers. It's so unsettling to the whole system. Why does anyone really think of it as a democracy in the first place? Like they're even shifting the goalposts now, like exculpation of directors in Delaware. Companies are putting up votes for exculpation of directors, which effectively allows the directors to get away with even less liability for the outcomes of their decisions, but they collect the same paycheck. The shareholder votes are vaguely binding, but not really binding. Companies are moving from Delaware to Texas. Like, I'm at a total loss. Like, what is it? Is it just total control that the company's going for? Like zero shareholder rights? Because I don't know what they think they don't have already. It's already kind of skewed. It's like so skewed that what are we talking about? Well, it's super skewed. I mean, I feel like we're sort of conflating two things. But just to speak to your overall point, yeah, it's about power. I mean, the bottom line is you have these individuals who would like to exercise complete power over big companies because that is enormously beneficial to them in terms of setting their own pay and enjoying a lifestyle, that's just incredible that, most people I think can't even fathom. And also they direct all the resources of these big companies. They really get to become shot callers across lots of different modes of life if you run a big public company. And so, yes, 100% of the objective here is to entrench a small set of individuals at the helm of these companies where they will be in perpetuity and just be, basically oligarchs, right? And so that's the end game. But then, there are two, if you think about sort of corporate governance, there are two major mechanisms. There are all of the democracy or electoral mechanisms, and then there's lawsuits. And so you were talking about both of them in your question. But really all the democracy stuff is supposed to reinforce this idea that the shareholder engages in self-government. When the shareholder invests their money, they get to decide what to invest in, and then they actually get a vote in the governance of the company to make sure that their investment is being well managed, right? And so that is separate and apart from this question about, later if things go badly, which you hope that they don't, but if they go badly, do you have a cause of action to sue in court, in which case you hope a judge will step in and either, enjoin something from happening. No, you can't sell this company or engage in this acquisition or whatever. Or, they'll just the judge will order damages. And so it's not great to be in the lawsuit situation. You'd much rather be exercising your freedom and your, engaging in self-government by through the vote. And shareholders vote a lot, right? They vote at least once a year. This is more than in political democracy. And then, if there's lots of things that if the company wants to do them, they have to go out and get the shareholders to vote on them. And they vote on, the equivalent of ballot initiatives, those shareholder proposals. There's say on pay. There's, lots of things going on in voting. So in theory, there could be this very robust version of corporate democracy. But we haven't figured out the sort of technology and the logistics of making that workable. And there are a lot of people invested in us never doing that because they like to be kings.
Well, and that to me is interesting. If the shift now, so that's a good correction, like as in our clarification, because the shift to Texas is more about the legal structure than the voting. Like the democratic structure is not the argument. You'd say it's more the legal structure, right? Like almost molding yourself against like legal incursion to your power.
Both things are going on. Because the state's law will define lots of aspects of the governance and many aspects of the election, the corporate election, and even theoretically the shareholder proposal. But of course, you're right. What's really going on here is that state law defines fiduciary duties, and fiduciary duties are a thorn in management's side. They don't like them because they could be held accountable for doing wrong stuff. And they want to do wrong stuff and not be held accountable, or at least not be sued. And so, what we're starting to see is this race to the bottom among the states, looking for states that have the most lax fiduciary duty law. And the states seem to be rushing to provide exactly the kinds of laws that corporate managers, not investors, but corporate managers want. And we're seeing this in Delaware, in a different, not relating to controlling shareholders. But this is an old story because this is how Delaware came to dominance, in the early 20th century in the first place, is by catering to corporate managers. That's a winning strategy.
You tell a story about Elijah Phillips in the Fitchburg Railroad in the paper, where he circumvents a proxy cap rule at the time, and it gets brought to court, and basically says, rather than fight it, he says, "Yeah, well, everybody does this. I'm not fighting this. This is common practice." He's found guilty, but Massachusetts repeals the law, and there's no accountability for Phillips at all. That seems to be exactly what Musk did with his pay package, which was it's rejected in the court of law. And he just served it back up to shareholders and said, see, they said it's fine. And now it's moving to Texas where they're going to say it's fine over here. There's no accountability. I don't lose my money. No money has changed hands. Everyone's happy. It seems like we're replaying the sort of same ebbs and flows if you're talking a race to the bottom for states, but it's also sort of like really just at some point shareholders have to say, do we care about accountability at all? Because if everyone's racing to the bottom, that's the cost, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, yes, history just keeps repeating itself. And of course, the one piece of history that we maybe don't want to really repeat, but I'm getting a little nervous about is the Great Depression, right? You had this sort of, roaring 20s lead up to a huge, incredible recession and downturn that then catalyzes everybody to suddenly do something about. I feel like we're sort of moving. It seems like we're moving toward that moment again. But yeah, I mean, it's accountability. I mean, the Phillips story that you're talking about, you just basically, it's the same old story. You have the head of a company. It happens to be a railroad. It happens to be the 19th century. What does he want? He wants to be paid a fortune. He wants to give his son a great job, right? Also, He's bad at his job. He's not good at running the railroad. But what does he want? Nobody to notice. He would like to continue running the railroad and have nobody notice that he stinks at it. And so, of course, though, there are all of these citizens, if you will, of the railroad, all of these shareholders, the constituents of the railroad who've invested their money, who would like the railroad to be run effectively and well, and who don't want to pay him an exorbitant salary and don't want his son in some management job. And so when they push back, right, then it comes to a head and you see whether there's going to be some sort of accountability, I'm basically describing how democracy works, right?
Right.
I mean, in politics, right? I mean, if you have somebody leading and they are bad at leading, is there going to be some form of accountability? Like, if your leaders get on Signal and start transmitting our war plans to the whole world, right? For anybody to... Right? Is anybody going to
real scenario?
Oh, is anybody going to be held accountable for that?
I mean, but that is ultimately is the sort of the problem because, like, while Phillips in the 19th century, so like the executive is bad at running the company. Well, Tesla's had the most recalls in the last year of any car company, right? Like Neuralink, like almost all of his companies have basically been paid by the government to exist at all. And they're seeing sales shocks. Phillips wants to put give his son a cush job. Well, Kimball Musk is on the board of Tesla. His brother's got a pretty cush job. Just cashed $20 million in his shares like last month or a month and a half ago. But there's no accountability then only because Massachusetts repeals the law. It does seem like shareholders then were more cognizant or more willing to sort of push back. I want a well-run company. Where shareholders this time around voted for his pay package a second time, voted in Kimball Musk a second time. It does seem like culturally something has happened where shareholders have given up the thought that accountability matters at all, which is why it's hard to be surprised that you lay out war plans on Signal and no one's going to be accountable. No one seems to care. What is that?
Oh, gosh, I wish I had an answer for you. I mean, I have written about the pathology of passivity and this idea that we have been cultivating in this country and mainly doing this through market logic. And in my space, in my field, in corporate law, we've been sort of cultivating this idea that, people shouldn't really exercise their power. They should defer to a set of elites, right? I mean, call it what it really is. There are these elites and they get to run everything and you should just kind of lean back and accept, the money that flows to you, that's good. And just accept that. And I think in hindsight, maybe it was a mistake to accept that. And, it is everywhere now, this ethos, and it seems to have pervaded the corporate, the economy associated with public companies. And so why, I mean, you know, why won't they do anything? I think because they're either afraid that there's going to be some blowback on them, or they'll be out of the club, or they just don't care that much, or everything is really good for them, right? If you're talking about people who work in the investment community, why would they try to discipline somebody? Maybe that's going to be them in 10 years.
What you're describing effectively begins a slippery slope towards authoritarianism. We just see it in the corporate democracy, and we're more okay with it because I guess the trade-off seems more tangible to the voters of the corporate democracy. Like it's like, as you said, if you've cultivated passivity, but they're paid for that passivity still, right? Like for the most part, you're willing to just say, well, whatever. I'm like, my stock's gone up, and like it's hard to be, especially universal owners. But you've sort of described this is where the Venn diagram gets kind of like real scary, because you're like you describe sort of the overlaps between our okayness with authoritarianism and the rise of dual class shares, for instance, in sort of the corporate democracy, with our casual indifference as we slide towards the destruction of institutions in the political democracy. Like,
yeah, we've
what's
completely
that look like for you. Yeah.
Well, we've completely accepted authoritarianism in the corporate space. And so, you know, what I have started saying in my work is that we developed essentially a parallel set of democratic institutions where there was this authoritarianism. We maybe call it democracy, but that's not really what it is. We just accepted it. It's exactly what you described, right? What people get out of it is they get the profits on their investments, right? As the stock market rises, everybody's, you know, generally happy. And so they'll live with a little authoritarianism. And it's only when the market turns down, or when, you know, the future's not so rosy and it seems like maybe the people we put in charge are doing a bad job or, you know, other countries are suddenly moving ahead, that, you know, maybe the bargain, the contours of the bargain become clear to everyone, and we realize, oh, we shouldn't have made that bargain. And I think for the winners of that bargain, the people who get to be in charge and fly around the world on their private jets and make all these decisions. Have you read Careless People? Have you read this new book, Careless People?
I bought it. I have both the audiobook and the physical book because I was afraid Facebook would somehow, or Meta would somehow remove it from shelves. So I got it just to be sure.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated by this book because I finally finished it, and I didn't expect it to end with shareholder proposals, by the way. I mean, it's sort of, there are, you know, elements of corporate democracy throughout the book, but it's mostly just a story, a description of corporate leaders who just really couldn't give a damn about the things that are really important to the rest of us, but they're just living these incredibly rich lives, you know, just, it's so stark, right? They are careless people in the mode of the Great Gatsby, right? And so we're sort of in that time again, right? I wish I had a happier, you know, story about it. People have to care and they have to do something.
Well, that's actually the action item, right? Like, and we can end on the action item, which to me is interesting because right now at this point in the corporate democracy, like, you know, there's voter turnout in the political democracy. It, you know, is higher than it has been in the past, I think, but a lot of it is driven now by misinformation and like there's all other issues over there. But in the corporate democracy, voter turnout might as well be zero. Like 96% is the average vote for a director, and almost every management proposal passes with zero pushback on anything. The only time that isn't the case is when an activist is involved, and that's when somebody wakes up and says, "Oh, we might need to vote differently," right? Is the answer to denormalize sort of authoritarianism something in the corporate democracy, like demanding for sunsetting of dual class shares, voting against directors at a higher and higher rate, like 0.2% of directors globally get voted out, can that number be more like 10 or 20%, right? Like especially with the universal proxy card, which we haven't talked about yet, but you mentioned as sort of like a way to sort of actually look at more like an election slate like we do in the political democracy. Is there a place in the corporate democracy to sort of change the tenor of what's happening if somebody exercised their rights, or do we feel like it's already too late?
I'm in favor of sunsetting, multi-class structures like you mentioned, but I think the solution is to some of these problems in corporate democracy is harnessing existing and new technologies to make voting easier. I think the problem is, this is something I talk about in the article that you were referencing, and in my book, I talk about it more, that, the problem with American corporate law is that it never really developed effective mechanisms of shareholder collective action. And so, in politics, we did develop effective mechanisms of collective action. We have a party system. So in politics, you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, there are a few other small parties, and those parties are extremely useful at creating policy agendas and fundraising for candidates, identifying candidates, putting them up. And they're just, they play a really core role. And as you know, in corporate democracy, we never developed that. And so what we need to do is come up with some really creative, outside the box thinking about how to make voting easier and more, relevant for all the people who invest. And this, I think it unfortunately will, because it has become so complex, it will involve a lot of different small fixes, and the universal proxy is one fix that I think is really meaningful. It's a step in the right direction, but unfortunately, we still have so far to go. I mean, everybody now invests through mutual funds, and mutual funds vote their shares on your behalf. Pass-through voting is a little questionable. So I'm still optimistic.
A little questionable. Like pass-through voting is a funny joke, is what it actually is. When you read like the policies, the facts of it's not great at all.
So many problems.
And it still doesn't get to the problem of like there's a proxy advisory duopoly, and there's effectively a shareholder ownership duopoly. So there's really, when Vanguard and BlackRock own on average 20 to 25% of every vote, and Glass Lewis and ISS own on average 98% of the advice market, we're really only talking about 4 entities are doing all the electing. I don't know that there's a technical solution that even gets around that. Right? Even if every individual could do it, there's no way that they're going to get excited about 22,000 active directors in the United States. Like,
no, that's why you need a party. You need something.
I see what you mean. Like
an organization. It's the same in politics, right? I mean, if you ever go to an election, at least this is my experience. You go vote, and suddenly you're staring at a ballot sheet, and half of the people who are running, you don't know who they are, right? How are you choosing who to vote for? I mean, I choose based on party. I trust the party to have developed and identified candidates whose values match my values. I think that's just basically how politics works. We haven't done that in corporate democracy, and that would make sense to me as the next stage of this, but I think it's a heavy lift.
That was Sarah Haan, corporate law professor at Washington and Lee Law School. Read her most recent paper on SSRN called Voting Rights in Corporate Governance, History and Political Economy. Has some of the stories we referenced and all the theories she's got there. And that final theory, the idea of basically political parties for corporate voting, is something that we're working on at Free Float. So stay tuned for that. Huge thanks to Sarah for joining and schooling me. Damien will be back next week to resume a roundup of the corporate democracy. Until then, goodbye.